Welcome to the New Ventures podcast. Our guest for today is Kavita Gandhi, the Executive Director of the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore. Welcome, Kavita.
Thank you, Sanjoy. It's so great to talk to you.
Kavita, let's start by talking about the fact that your membership includes both indigenous Singaporean companies as well as international companies. It would be nice to hear of some of the stories of how these companies are helping Singapore transition to clean energy.
Right. So you're so right to say that we have different companies, different shapes and sizes. We have large multinational companies. We have local companies who have become big. We also have some very small companies. So across the board, all kinds and different technologies. It's a very interesting mix, I would like to say. So let me touch upon a few companies. For example, we have a local SME called Sanjoy that is doing a lot of solar EPC work. They're using very innovative business models of power purchase agreements, etc. We also have a slightly smaller company, Energetics, that's doing EPC work with very innovative technologies. Similarly, if I shift gears to the energy efficiency side, we have all the big names, Siemens, Honeywell, Johnson Control, but we also have a local company, G Energy, that is doing some fantastic work. And I can go on and on for different sectors, but I think let's discuss this as we go down in our interview.
Companies located in Singapore also expand to markets in the ASEAN region. So can you tell us a little bit about companies who have done that successfully?
Right, Sanjay. So as you know, Singapore is a very small city country and a market, while very innovative and cutting edge, but it's not large enough. So our companies look at ASEAN as the extended home market. And then some of them even go further to India, China, Middle East, and some of them to Europe and US as well. Some of the interesting things that have been done in the region would be in the area of energy efficiency. I think that's always an easier sell because companies can save money as they save energy. So some of our local companies have done energy efficiency work in Malaysia, in Indonesia, as well as China, actually. And similar things go for our solar companies as well as grid-related companies. There are a lot of floating solar farms being planned in Indonesia, for example, by multiple of our members. And the electricity would be imported to Singapore. So that's something very new that we are very excited about, because we know in Singapore how much ever renewables we can produce within our geographic boundaries, it would not be enough and adequate to meet our requirements because we have quite a thriving industry. So we are looking at every option, optimizing what we have, and then after that, looking at buying from other neighboring countries as well. And all our member companies are at the forefront. I can give you some examples. A small company, LYS, they did a power purchase agreement with Decathlon in Jakarta, for example. That was one of very innovative projects. Sunseap is building a 2.2 gigawatt hours floating solar, farm in Batam in Indonesia. Semcorp, another one of our members, is also doing, similar floating solar as well as ground-mounted solar projects where electricity can be imported. And it's not only about importing electricity. A lot of them are also doing projects for that specific country and to meet their needs as well. So that's something, some of the activity that has been going on recently.
Right. And you mentioned it has been easier for companies and energy efficiency to expand in the ASEAN region. In fact, in a previous podcast episode, we had Sunil Yadav, who is the head of building sustainability in Siemens Singapore, talk about exactly this. How being located in Singapore as a hub helps you to demonstrate projects, and it gives you the respect to expand into other markets in ASEAN region.
Very true, Sanjoy. You hit the nail on the head, actually. I was about to move to that these are also for MNCs, exactly what you said. Singapore is the springboard to expand into the region. Also, Singapore companies, I would say even the local companies have a certain amount of credibility that is associated with them. And people and the companies in the region are quite eager to work with Singapore companies because they know that when they promise something, they deliver.
Yes, I think we are going to beat our own trumpet by saying this, but I think there's sort of business ethics and integrity that comes with being located in Singapore, at least a reputation of that, which I think is fantastic, actually.
Right.
So you've already given a lot of examples of young companies who are your members, and I know that you do specific things to promote innovation. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those activities?
So for our young companies or startups, as we call them, we started a program 3 years ago called the Sustainable Energy Startup Network. This came out of a sort of a need that from the market saying that CEAS has a lot of mature companies, but what about these young companies? How can we help them? And Singapore government, from Enterprise Singapore was very keen that we support these companies. So we took on that project and we have been working with them for the last 3 years, and we've seen a lot of interesting companies that have come out. And basically what we do with these companies is a whole host of different activities. So when we interviewed some of these startups, besides funding, which they all have is the pain point, but besides funding, one of the areas that they had the biggest issue with was test bedding their technologies, which means, can a large company actually allow us to test bed, do a pilot project? So that's an area that we really took up quite actively. And we spoke to some of our larger companies and we managed to get some of these test beds going for these startups. So that was good. The other area that we really worked pretty actively was in connecting them to investors. So we have a program called iPitch, and we saw that we ran about 8 of them last year. And the way iPitch works is that we curate a slate of startups in a particular theme. It could be electric vehicles, it could be green buildings, it could be renewables, it could be hydrogen. And then we present them to a group of investors that follow us very actively. And we just don't leave it at that. After the so-called matching exercise or iPitch exercise, what we do is we do actual matching, whereas the investors request us to connect them to certain startups. And that's something that the startups really appreciate. The third activity, which I think has been rather successful, is the startup training that we have been doing. And this training is nothing to do with technology because all of them know the technology inside out. The biggest challenge they have is in structuring the company, their term sheets, how to raise the funding. So we brought in some very renowned venture capitalists to talk to our startups to really help them do that part. That was not really their forte. So that's worked pretty well for our startups. And then I'm sure you know, Sanjoy, that we do an annual competition called Power Ace, where we source submissions from startups all over the world, and we get close to 150 submissions, and we shortlist 12, and then we give them awards. And most of our winning startups and shortlisted startups have gone on to do pretty well. So I'm pretty happy with the kind of progress and the kind of ecosystem that is developing in Singapore. It's quite amazing to see these young companies raise money and move on to the next phase of their journey. And one very nice thing that we have is that many of them come back to join CEAS as members. So that's very heartwarming for us to see these companies that we supported in their infancy are very keen to be part of full members of CEAS. So that's quite nice.
I think one of the things that you do very well is, just provide the holistic range of services, not just helping companies connect with investors, but, providing matchmaking, providing training. And I think that, full circle is very, very important. But I wanted to just expand a little bit into one thing that you said, which is helping companies test bed solutions. When you say larger companies, do you mean customers? Do you mean utilities? Do you mean other larger companies like the Siemens and the Schneiders who are part of your member ecosystem?
So actually, it's both, Sanjoy. We haven't yet done any test bedding with a utility as such, but it's been mostly with large companies. There was one, I can't name them, but there was a large semiconductor company that test bedded one of our technologies. There was a hotel that did the test bedding with one of our startups, and so on and so forth. Also, it sometimes what happens is very interesting. Like one of our large company was mentoring a startup, And he got so interested in the technology that they are having further conversations. We are not like a official incubator or accelerator of sorts, but what we do is this very open sort of connections, capability development. Wherever we see the gap, we come in and fill that gap. And I think that's what's been the strength of our program, actually.
Right. I will sort of, put some of the things that you're saying in my own words. So one of the advantages of young companies being sort of engaging with the CS, even though they're not members as yet, is the network of larger companies, through mentoring, through the example that you gave of working with the semiconductor company. That's very hard to get, but also to work with end customers who are not your members, like the hotel, for example, but who would accept an introduction given which comes from the association. That's kind of what I'm getting from what you're saying.
That's exactly right, Sanjoy. You're spot on. That's what we have been doing. And we are always on the lookout for large companies that are keen to really work with these young startups. And just yesterday, I met a very large IT company, and they told me that, hey, we are always on the lookout because these are the companies that have a lot of niche and cutting edge technologies. So do bring them in touch with us if you see anything of interest in XYZ area. So, that's what is the advantage of being in an association, that we are connected with the ecosystem very well, even with the government agencies, as well as with international institutions. Come on, we've been in touch with your company that's doing so much work with these, with the younger companies as well. So it's things like this that really move the needle, I feel, rather than just being a very strict incubator with a very defined cohort. So I think what makes us special is that we are very nimble and we can take up opportunities and actualize it for the startups very quickly. And we give them what they need. There are some who need like technology advice. There are others who need investors. There are others who need test beds. So, we are very nimble and we move with their needs. I think that's what the startups keep coming back to us for. And also not to forget that we are not charging them anything till they become of a reasonable size. So that's another thing that we are very proud of doing, of really supporting, because at the end of the day, we are an industry association and we want this sector to grow. And that's the reason why we do that.
Well, thank you for the plug on Regain Paradise, my company.
Yes.
We are obviously very, very excited to partner with you, especially on Power Ace, which is the competition you talked about earlier.
Right.
I will go ahead and ask you something which is about the research and development. Obviously, we've talked a lot about partnerships with larger organizations, but Singapore, of course, has Asia's best universities, right? And how have the R&D capabilities of Singapore's universities helped both the younger companies as well as the larger companies?
Right, Sanjoy. So I'm sure you're familiar with the two big powerhouses that we have in Singapore to do with energy. One is the Solar Energy Research Institute of Singapore, which focuses on solar developments. And then we have the Energy Research Institute at NTU, that's Nanyang Technological University, which is our leading university here. And CERIS, which I mentioned earlier, is the National University of Singapore, the other leading university. So we work very closely with both these institutions. So in terms of CERIS, we work very closely with them. They are, in fact, a member of CES. And we work actively in promoting any new technology, showcasing any new innovations that have come through their research. One example is a floating PV sort of event that we run with them. And we have been running that for the last 4 to 5 years when nobody was talking about floating PV. And CERIS is at the cutting edge. And, those are the kind of things that we do with CERIS. And also our companies, some of them who are module manufacturers, work very closely with CERIS to really improve their energy, yields and efficiency of their modules, etc. So it's a very important partnership. CERIS has also done a system whereby they can track all the solar systems in Singapore and see how much of energy is being produced at any given point of time. They've even gone further to even identify which are the areas where the yield is high And we always work with them to really, amplify the work that they are doing. And then moving on to ARIAN, the Energy Research Institute at NTU, we have been working very actively with them right from the beginning. They are a very close partner, and both CERIS and ARIAN are partners for us for our annual conference that we run, Asia Clean Energy Summit, and a lot of work is showcased there. In terms of ARIAN, we are also a partner on a program called Eco Labs. So that's a program where they really help startups as well as SMEs, Singapore companies, to really value add to their technologies, to adapt some of the technologies that the companies could be sort of developing. One example, which will be announced very shortly, is an app for energy efficiency, where we connected one of our members to Arian, and they are going to be launching that very soon. So I don't want to be stealing their thunder. But similarly, there are many startups from our network that we connect to Ecolab program so that they can go on and enhance their technologies. And likewise, Ecolabs refers a lot of startups back to us once they are ready for commercialization, because that's what we are good at. So it's a very symbiotic relationship that we have with the universities. And there are a few other centers also that we work with. So it's in Singapore, I think a lot of emphasis is being put on research and development, and a lot of dollars are being put behind that. And thus we are seeing some very exciting kind of work that's coming out from these universities.
Yeah, I think this is a very comprehensive answer. So thank you very much for this. I wanted to ask you one question. We've talked a lot about partnerships. One of the things I'm really curious to learn about is how these ecosystem of companies are building smart energy solutions using IoT and energy systems and transportation systems all integrated together. Can you give us a few examples?
Sure, Sanjoy. So I think that is an area which has been developing very, very quickly. Traditionally, our companies were into hardware and engineering and EPCs and consulting. But of late, I'm seeing this huge shift into this intelligent solutions space. And these are companies who are doing it at technology level, where you're optimizing a chiller, for example. I think you interviewed one of my startup members, Lekha, whose technology is doing that. They're optimizing chillers. And then there are companies that are doing it at a building level. And then there are others who are also doing it at a district level. We have a company called Resync Technologies that has done recently a university in Thailand, where they control the energy systems and optimize it for the entire university. So it's quite interesting. And on the other hand, we also have members like IBM who do it at a very, very massive scale. So I think we have both ends of the spectrum, where you want to do a piece of technology, you want to do a building, or you want to do a university, or you want to do a whole city. I think all those solutions are sitting within SEAS. Since you asked me for examples, I'm also tempted to mention a few other companies. We have a company called AVA that makes drones. And their drones are actually monitoring the solar farms and solar systems to do predictive maintenance, for example. So that's something that they do very well, and they've been getting a lot of business, not just in Singapore, but even outside of Singapore. We have other companies that have storage solutions, that could optimize for, in Singapore, we don't need that much storage in terms of power supply, because we are fully grid connected and we have ample power available. And these companies are, of course, working in other solutions, in other countries. But in Singapore, there's a very interesting solution for peak and off-peak timing. So the electricity is expensive at certain times and it's cheaper at the other times. So you could actually store the energy during the off-peak time and use it during the peak time. So it's an economic kind of a solution, even though we have enough power. So there are companies who are doing that. We have other companies who have recently joined us, a company called Alexis that is doing grid optimization using software. I mean, one issue that not just Singapore, but countries around the region are facing are with the intermittency of the renewables. So their technology takes care of that. There are some very interesting intelligent solutions that are coming out, including artificial intelligence. And many of these companies are based out of Singapore or being developed in Singapore, both like local and international companies. But I think Singapore has become a very fertile sort of ground for these companies to come test their technologies, maybe get some R&D dollars if they are, of course, have a local partner, because most of the funding that comes to these companies from, if it's in the form of a grant, then they need to have at least 30% Singapore component, which is not a lot. You can still hold 7% of your company and then become part of the Singapore ecosystem and be called a Singapore company. I think that's quite a good deal. And then you can start developing your technology here. You can even get help to export your technology out of Singapore. So there's a lot of solutions like that. And that's one of the things that we do as an association. We help these companies, that would like to be based out of Singapore to really grow.
I'll take out two key takeaways from here. One is the point that you made that of solutions at various levels. I mean, obviously there are components of solutions, storage, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and so on and so forth. But the solutions work at two broad levels. One is at the city level, and the other is at the individual enterprise level. The hotel example that you gave, at district levels, somewhere in between. So that's really one point that I'll take away. The second point that I will take away is, if you are, for example, a startup working out of Berkeley, I mean, just to pick an example, and you want to test bed the solution with customers, it seems that Singapore is a great place to come, because you could partner with some really intelligent people, from the universities, from large companies, from other smaller companies. You could start up a company here, 70% your own holding, 30% the local partners holding, and get a chance to test bed, get a chance to raise some more R&D money, and so on and so forth. Are these two takeaways the relevant ones, at least for now?
Indeed, Sanjoy. Exactly, they're very relevant. And also you very correctly mentioned blockchain, which I forgot to actually mention, that blockchain is another area that's developing very quickly in Singapore, both for the fintech side of things, but I think our energy side or energy sector is also adapting a lot of these blockchain technologies. So we have a company called Air Carbon that's using a blockchain platform for housing and trading of carbon credits. They've already gone global with offices in Dubai and Europe and Brazil and things. So I think it's all because of the support and the nurturing environment that Singapore has, and it's a financial center. So I think that also helps companies. And also on the other hand, the government is very keen to support these new innovative technologies.
Right. One question that I wanted to ask you, which is that, we've been talking about energy. I'm noticing that in your membership list today, you have carbon companies, right, who are in carbon exchange and voluntary carbon markets. That's a new category that is opening up, is it?
Actually, Sanjoy, we've always had the carbon companies as part of our ecosystem. Because when you look at carbon, how do you derive carbon? It's a lot of time it's because of some of the technologies that are being used, whether it's energy efficiency or it's renewables or bioenergy or solar or whatever it may be. So somehow the carbon companies have always been part of our ecosystem, but I think they've just got a second win after the carbon prices have started moving, as you know. So they are doing some very interesting work. One of our companies, CRX, which is doing a programmatic carbon program for electric vehicles, for example, which is probably going to be the first of its kind, in the world. So there are some very innovative sort of solutions that are coming out of Singapore, because I think we don't have the low-hanging fruits anymore. We don't have any steel plants, we don't have any paper mills, we don't have any textile mills. So whatever our companies need to do has to be at the cutting edge. It has to be something different, it has to be something innovative. Electric vehicles is something that we have not touched on yet. So if you allow me, I'll just talk for a few seconds about that. So Singapore has already said that we are going to go fully electric by 2030. So there's not too much time left for us. So there's been a lot of interest in that space. And we are getting a whole ecosystem of electric vehicle related companies. So the infrastructure companies, the software companies that sit as a layer on top, building owners, which are going to be the petrol stations of the future, because we're not going to have any petrol stations anymore. Actually, even petrol stations in Singapore who are looking at having charging stations there, fast chargers where people can come and just charge their cars, like filling up petrol and things like that. So there's a lot of innovation and interest that has been going on in electric vehicles. As an association, we did a white paper on electric vehicles and leveling the playing field for electric vehicles back in 2016. And we've been actually going on with this topic and really promoting it. But it seems like their time has come now. And we have just formed an electric vehicle working group just yesterday. So it's fresh and top of my mind. And we look forward to doing a lot more work with these companies to see how Singapore can electrify their transportation system even more. So our public transport, MRTs, etc., already electric. The buses, there's a huge shift in getting all the buses to be electric. But now even these passenger vehicles in Singapore are going to be electrified. And we have a very good opportunity in Singapore because every 10 years we have to renew what we called a certificate of entitlement, which is like a tax that we pay for owning a vehicle, putting a car on the road in Singapore. So we have this opportunity to phase out the ICE vehicles, the internal combustion engine vehicles, out of our mix slowly. So that's something that we are very excited about as well.
2016 was definitely early days for releasing a white paper on electric vehicles. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
One of the things that we also have not touched upon, and I noticed that there are members in your system who do this, which is bioenergy. It isn't obvious that a Singaporean company to work in bioenergy, but I'm sure there are some stories there.
Right, Sanjoy. You're so true. We haven't touched upon bioenergy, which is a very interesting sector of our ecosystem. And you're also right that in Singapore, why bioenergy? A lot of people don't realize that we produce a lot of food waste. So there's an opportunity to treat the food waste. And we also have the horticultural waste, which needs to be treated. We also have the municipal solid waste. So there's a lot of work that's going on in that area. As you know, Singapore actually incinerates its waste, which is a very expensive technology. And it's been an effort from the government side to see how we can minimize what we put into the incinerator. We have very limited land space. So the bottom ash still needs to be landfilled somewhere. We do it on an island off Singapore called Pulau Semakau. And obviously, we don't want to keep on producing waste and just putting it into the incinerator. So there's a huge movement, both from the government side, the encouragement and grants and incentives, and also from the younger Singaporeans. We are looking to see how we can reduce our waste. Plastic is a big issue. We are looking at plastic recycling in a big way. There are new technologies that are coming into Singapore to do that. As well as with all our other waste. So there is an opportunity for companies in that space to come and play in Singapore.
Fantastic. And as a final question, do you have any thoughts on what Singapore offers to innovators as we get into this crucial decade?
Right, Sanjoy. Let me just say there are at least 3 very clear areas where Singapore has an advantage for young companies and even more mature companies. One, of course, is that your IP is fully protected. That's one of the reasons why many companies like to come to Singapore and do their research and come up with their technologies. We have a very strong IP protection laws as well as culture. Secondly, I think we have a very strong fintech industry, not just fintech, actually financial industry. So there's a huge shift also towards green financing. Actually, we just had, a few bankers on our discussion roundtables and panels recently, and they're all saying that there's more money than their bankable projects. And they are not talking only about Singapore, they're talking also about the region. So that's the other advantage. When these companies work out of Singapore and they go to the region, they can bring our banks along. They can bring our service sector. We have very good lawyers. All the other services that they need are very easily available, and they're quite well informed in that space. And lastly, I would say the R&D. I think there's a lot of research and development emphasis. And I think we touched upon it earlier that companies can actually get grants as well as funding from private sector to do some research. There's some very interesting labs, very well-developed labs in our universities that companies can use. And lastly, I think there has been a big push to promote these young companies, even from the government in the last 5 to 7 years. There's so much of emphasis on growing these young companies and, really promoting them, supporting them. So I think they would find it very nurturing to land in Singapore and grow their business.
IP, finance, services, these are three key things. And you haven't mentioned the wonderful street food as well, right? Some of which is becoming, friendly for the vegan and vegetarian taste as well.
That's true, Sanjoy. I would be really lacking if I don't mention the wonderful, wonderful hawker centers of Singapore and the food courts where you can get a fantastic meal for $5. It's delicious, it's clean, and like you said, now even vegetarian friendly.
Thank you. With that, thank you very much. And hopefully the COVID will sort of peter away next year and you'd get more interest of companies coming to Singapore.
Thank you, Sanjoy. It's been wonderful talking to you, and I look forward to working even more closely with Regain Paradise and some of the other young companies who want to come to Singapore.
Thank you so much.